What's going on, guys? So I started out making this video. I was going to do a question and answer session and respond to some of your questions. And the first one that I started replying to, I realized was going to be a much bigger subject than I anticipated. And in fact, I figured by the time I finished my long-winded response, there was going to be no room left in the video for any other questions, without it being just annoyingly long. So what I'd like to do instead is just focus on that one topic for this video and take the time to unpack it because I think it's interesting and many of you have asked about this. So without any further delay, let's dive into it. The question of the day is, now that you've been learning Japanese for a while, what would you do differently? Meaning, if you could go back in time and change something about your approach, what would it be, knowing what you know now? Now, my first reaction to that question is honestly not that much. I do think that my process for learning Japanese has been pretty efficient. I mean, about as efficient as it can be. That said, I would change some things. I have had time to make some mistakes in Japanese, and I would go back and do things a little bit differently if I could. The first mistakes that I made relating to Japanese, and I'm going to lump them all into one here, these relate to kanji. So, my first mistake with learning kanji was not making enough mnemonics. Now, I started off on the right path by breaking kanji down into its component pieces first and learning radicals by using mnemonics, and right there is about where the similarities end with my current approach. Now, I've talked in great detail about my current method in the video called A Revised Approach for Dealing with Kanji, I believe, so check that video out. The short version is that now I'm making a lot more mnemonics. So let's say that you have a kanji character that contains 4 pieces, and you're familiar already with those 4 pieces. Using the old approach, I would then make a story that combined those 4 mnemonic images that helped me remember that character as a whole. Now I will not only learn images for the 4 pieces, but then I'll chunk them into 2 plus 2, and then at the end I would have a final mnemonic image for the entire character. So I have to break it down into little pieces and then build it back up in chunks. My original approach was a lot harder to remember because I was trying to remember a lot more pieces at a time. So that is mistake number 1, is not making enough mnemonics. Mistake number 1B related to kanji is using stroke order tests. So I would have flashcards that ask me, what is the stroke order of this kanji character? And I'm not doing that anymore. So I think that they can be good for some people and for some goals, but I stopped doing them a long time ago, and I'm a much happier person because of that. The only caveat with that, I would say, is that I still do think it's a good idea to do that at the beginning, just for a little while, maybe the first 100 or 200 characters that you learn, just so you get a basic idea of how the stroke order works, because it is helpful to know a little bit. But once you kind of get the gist of it, I think it's okay to drop that if it's not a priority for you. The second mistake that I made in my Japanese learning would be not using the core series flashcard decks earlier. And I guess the same could be said about sentences. I think I probably waited longer than I needed to before moving on to sentences. But the sentences are related to the core deck. So the core deck has 10,000 flashcards, 10,000 words with example sentences for all of those. And what really makes this valuable is that they have native speaker audio recordings of all of these sentences. So what I'm doing now with these core sentences, I explained a little bit in a video recently called something about customizing pre-made flashcard decks, and not a lot of people watched it, maybe because I labeled it as a tutorial, but I would check it out, if nothing else, just for the beginning part where I talk about what I'm doing with it now, which is kind of a recent development, and I think it's a pretty sweet setup, so it's worth checking out. The thing that I'm doing now is I have all of these core flashcards in my Anki system. I just went ahead and imported all 10,000 words. Now when I come across a word, whether it's in a lesson or just something I think of that I want to know, I can then go into Anki and search for that word, and there's likely to be at least one sentence in there using that word. So here's what I would do differently. What you could do if you are using the Fluent Forever 625 list, for example, is, you're learning all these words with images. That's good. Do that from the start. Don't worry about sentences from the beginning. But what I would change, and what you could do, is maybe halfway through that list, you can start searching for your words from that list in the core deck. And these are all going to be, for the most part, really high frequency words. And so they're very likely to have a bunch of examples that you can use in there. I think the core flashcards could be a great transition from learning the first words into learning your first sentences. So that would be my second mistake, or thing that I would redo in a different way, is start using that resource sooner. The third mistake has to do with expectations. And as a beginner, or before I was even a beginner, before I started learning Japanese, I had some misconceptions about what it was going to take to learn Japanese and what it was going to take to get to the level that I wanted to be at. Now, I thought that I did my research really well. I thought I had a really good idea of what to expect, and I felt pretty prepared for whatever was going to happen. Now, the mistakes that I made had to do with vocabulary and kanji requirements. So first of all, vocabulary. For the languages that I learned previously, so mainly French and Italian, and I think this is more or less true for Norwegian, which I learned to a lesser extent, if you know 2,000 words in those languages, you are in a very good position. In fact, in most cases, that's enough to take you to a B2 level, which is considered the beginning of fluency by European standards. And, you can do a lot with those 2,000 words, granted that you have enough grammar knowledge to use those words. Now, the mistake that I made was that I assumed in Japanese that would be the same. Unfortunately, in Japanese, that is not the case. If you want to get to that same level, it's going to require quite a few more words. That would be somewhere in the range of 4,000 to 6,000, I would say. So between the N3 and N2 requirements. That was pretty surprising to me. I didn't think that Japanese would use more words than another language. And I do think there are some discrepancies because there's a lot of compound words, and they kind of maybe get counted twice when you combine them, stuff like that. But now, having learned some Japanese, I can say that I think they do actually use more words. I mean, there are a lot of examples where you have many different ways of saying something. So think about family members, for example. Your siblings, there's so many different ways to talk about them depending on if they're older than you or younger than you, or if it's part of your family or someone else's family. And this kind of stuff happens everywhere. So it feels like, for most words that I know in Japanese, I have at least one or two, maybe three alternatives that mean roughly the same thing. And that's just the way Japanese is. So I didn't know that, and that would have been useful to know in the beginning. The other point related to this is the kanji requirements. Now, in this case, I actually had the reverse situation where I overestimated what I would need. So I was under the impression, not knowing any Japanese, that I was going to have to know the 2,000 Joyo kanji, because that's kind of the thing that gets thrown around all the time, where people say, if you know those 2,000 characters, you will be literate in Japanese. At least that's the impression that you can get as an outsider. That's not exactly the case. And in fact, even if you know all of those characters, it doesn't really matter if you don't know those 6,000 words, for example. So it's kind of like saying you only need 26 letters to be able to read English, but that's kind of irrelevant if you don't know the words. So Yes, kanji is important, but the vocabulary and the words that you know, I think have a much bigger effect on your ability to read. So, that being said, if you want to look at the N2 on, the JLPT, for example, the N2 requirements are 6,000 words, I believe, and 1,000 kanji. If you want to get, N1, you have to know all 2,000 kanji and maybe 10,000 words or something, I forget. But point being, supposedly you can learn 6,000 words with 1,000 kanji. I think that's a little bit skewed. I think that they're assuming you're not going to know all of the kanji for all of those words. Like for some of them, you're only going to know the kana spelling. But anyway, I think you're definitely going to need more than 1,000 characters to write 6,000 words. Actually, the way I know that is that I know 1,000 characters now. By the way, I know 1,000 characters now, and I know around 2,000 words. So as I approach those higher numbers of vocabulary, I'm definitely going to be learning more kanji. But point being, I'm not going to need 2,000 characters in this first year. So in that way, my assumption was actually wrong in the good way, so I don't have to learn as many characters as I thought. Now, with all of that being said about my misconceptions that I originally had about vocab and kanji, I think that the estimates that I had for the time that was going to be required for Japanese are still roughly in the correct ballpark. So I had based a lot of my estimations on the idea that Japanese was going to take around 4 times as long as the previous languages that I had learned, based on the Foreign Service Institute numbers, which kind of indicate that. I estimate that my Italian took around 200 hours and that my French was probably around 300 hours. I mean, I didn't track those languages as meticulously as I am doing with Japanese, but that's what I estimate. If you multiply 200 times 4, you get 800 hours. If you multiply 300 for the French equivalent times 4, you're going to get 1,200 hours. So from the beginning, I was estimating that if I was going to take Japanese to a similar level as those languages, it would take somewhere between 800 and 1,200 hours. And I think that that is probably still accurate. We will see. The jury is still out on that one. But I think that despite those kanji and vocab misconceptions, I think that the time estimation from the beginning was still pretty spot on. And so I think that to achieve that in a year is still within the realm of possibility. The last mistake that I made in Japanese has to do with overworking. And I think that some of this comes with a challenge like this, where you're pushing yourself and you're going to find your limits, you're going to go too far, and you kind of have to make those mistakes to find out what level of work you can tolerate. And specifically in overworking, I'm not talking about, like, I don't know, overdoing it and getting burned out and losing motivation. It's not that at all. It's a matter of taking on too much stuff at once and getting a snowball effect of a workload that is not sustainable and not maintainable. So what happened, well, first let me give you a little bit of context before I tell you about my train wreck this summer that I don't think I really mentioned yet. So my mishap has to do with the number of things that I was trying to learn every day. In a previous language like French or Italian, when I would study new things at a rate of 30 new flashcards a day in Anki, so this is not 30 new words a day, this is 30 new flashcards. When I would do those 30 flashcards a day, that usually ended up being around 30 minutes of work a day. And likewise, if I bump that up to 60 flashcards a day, 60 new flashcards, that would be around 60 minutes a day. Now, in Japanese, it takes me about twice as long per flashcard, maybe a little bit less, but I generally find that 30 new flashcards a day in Japanese actually takes me an hour a day. And likewise, if I do 60 flashcards a day, usually takes me around 2 hours, an hour and a half or 2 hours. So if I'm in a super busy period, say I'm on tour and I'm traveling a lot and I just don't have a lot of time, I will generally kick it to 30 flashcards a day, 30 new flashcards a day. And that evens out to around an hour. And I usually find that even if I'm really busy, I can find time for 1 hour, like in the morning or something, before I get to everything else. I've also done, higher levels of like 60. And where I got into trouble, actually twice this year, I was studying at a rate of 120 new flashcards a day, which I do not recommend. The first time I did it was actually okay, believe it or not. I didn't have any problems, and that was at the very beginning of the year. So that was okay because I kind of had free time in the first couple of weeks of the year, and then I think actually the real reason that it was okay was I couldn't make flashcards fast enough to fill the demand for all of those 120 flashcards. So I don't think I ever really got to that peak workload. So that's why I survived the first time in January. The second time was this summer. I think it was in June. And, I'd been traveling a lot during the year up until that point. And then finally I had this really long free break. And I had basically the whole month of June off. And so I decided to take on 120 new flashcards a day. And it was brutal. My daily study regimen took me about 4 hours to just finish the Anki reviews, which is really hard. I mean, it's not just the time of 4 hours, but it's really an intense 4 hours, a really mentally draining 4 hours. So that was tough. It was really hard to push through that. I actually was able to maintain that for a while. I had a week or a week and a half where this was going really well. And I was learning a lot really fast. But here's where the problem comes in. Things don't go to plan, and you should always account for that. Something will come up, and something did for me. So I had one day, a gig or something. I was busy all day and I couldn't do any studies. And that screwed me over big time. So remember, I'm studying at a rate of 4 hours a day just to finish this stuff. And so if I miss one day, I'm screwed because the next day I have to do 8 hours to catch up on all that stuff. And of course I didn't finish all 8 hours the next day. And so then I keep falling behind. That one day of missing that time, of missing those studies, set me back probably a week or a week and a half just to catch up on all that stuff. So in the end, all of that fast progress I made in the previous time was not worth it. So that is the risk with the super high volume spaced repetition stuff. You have to be able to catch up on it. You cannot miss a day or you will regret it. So with all of that being said, I think those are the items that I would take a look at if I were going to go back and redo some version of this year and this challenge. I would definitely change those things in my approach. But in the grand scheme of things, those are really not giant modifications. So I think my original plan and the whole approach has really sort of worked, from the beginning. But, I had that previous language experience to go on, so I kind of knew what to expect. So those are the top 4 mistakes and my remedies for those. I hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you for watching, and see you later. Bye. Hey guys, just one quick announcement before you get out of here. This Tuesday, September 19th, there is a new Kickstarter being launched for a new app by Fluent Forever, and I am super excited about this thing. So nobody is telling me to say this or paying me or anything. I'm just really excited about it and I want to use it, and so I want to see this thing get the support that it deserves, and I want to see it get the funding it needs to get all of the cool features that they want to implement. So the best thing you can do to support this thing is support it on the first day that the campaign launches, and especially during the first hour. This is a really critical period for the Kickstarter algorithm. Somehow, when they calculate it, if a campaign surpasses a certain threshold in the first hour, it allows that campaign to be stuck on the front page of Kickstarter for a much longer time. And so it gets a lot more exposure and a lot more potential for support, and thus more funding and thus more features. So the number one thing you can do to help this thing succeed is support it in the first hour. And so if you do so, they're going to give you some bonuses. The app is based on the Fluent Forever methodology, which I'm using to learn Japanese, and I've used to learn French and Italian and pieces of Norwegian and Spanish and some other random phrases for travel. And it's been working amazingly well for me, and it's actually changed my life. The only thing about this method that can really be improved in terms of efficiency and ease of use is the flashcard creation process, which is still kind of annoying and clunky with Anki. As much as I love it and as great as Anki is, it's not the most user-friendly thing for a lot of people, and it's still a big barrier to entry, and it's time-consuming. So this app aims to solve that. It's going to be sort of a one-stop shop thing where you could, in theory, become fluent, from scratch in a language using just this one app alone, which is not something that has really been done before. The other thing with this app, and this is the last thing I'll mention about it, is that they're going to have this database for all these languages that they support of sentences and vocabulary and recordings by native speakers. And this will be initially supplied by them. They're going to have their 625 list with example sentences for all of those words, but then they're going to open it up to the community. And this is what's going to be really cool if a lot of people get involved and start uploading their own sentences from their tutors and stuff, is all of a sudden we're going to have access to all of these recordings, and they're going to be verified and proofread and stuff, and you're going to be able to use those sentences in your own learning. And that is going to be a fantastic resource for learning. So if you can, check it out this Tuesday. The first hour is the most important. If you pledge at $40 or above, they're going to give you 3 months extra to this service. So here's the way this app works. If you pay $40, normally you're just paying for 1 month is what it says you're paying for. But since you're contributing to this Kickstarter campaign, you're actually going to get 2 extra bonus months already, because you're going to be able to access this app during the 2-month beta testing period. So you already got 3 months there, and then if you support during the first hour, you'll get 3 more months, which means for $40 you get access to this awesome, beautiful thing for 6 months, which is enough, ladies and gentlemen, to learn a level 1 language like French or Spanish or something if you're a native English speaker. So $40 for language is not bad at all. Please check this thing out. They will be launching with a bunch of the popular main languages and the ones that are easy to program, so French and Spanish and German. But the first stretch goal that they want to add, if they get the funding, and that's why I'm doing this message, is support for Japanese and Chinese, which is much more complicated from the development point of view because of how they have to deal with kanji and radicals and mnemonics and all of that, which they really want to implement, and I want to see it implemented, and I would love to use it. So please support this thing if you can. Anytime during the campaign is great, but especially during that first hour. And that first hour is at 8 a.m. if you're in Los Angeles or the West Coast, USA or Canada. For the East Coast, it will be 11 a.m. If you're in London, it's at 4 p.m. This is all Tuesday, the 19th. If you are in Japan, it's going to be midnight on Tuesday night going into Wednesday. So if you can support it then, that'd be great. This is really just a self-interested message because I want to see these features happen. So I want to see it get the support that it deserves. That's my spiel. Thank you for listening. I hope you check out the link to the app, and I hope you dig it and support it. So I think they will thank you for it as well. That's all. I'll see you guys next time around. Thanks. Bye.